Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Colonial Williamsburg. My name is Brian Weldy, and we're talking to you from the porch of the Benjamin Powell House because it's a beautiful spring day here in Colonial Williamsburg, and so where else would you be? What we want to do is I want to talk to you a little bit about a project that I've been working on for a while, and that's what I title Circular Sashes and Curved Casements. This has been an interesting investigation of some of the different circular windows, the curved work, and architectural details that we find here in Williamsburg. To tell you a little bit about our trade, joiners are folks that specialize in architectural details. We're the ones that you would go to for things like window sashes and doors and fireplace mantles. So this is kind of right up our alley. And as they say in the Universal Builder book that was published in 1774, that window sashes are well made, require good execution, and should always be put in the hands of men of merit and experience. So it requires a special skill set and also special tools to do this kind of work. And I want to talk to you a little bit about some of those things that we would come upon in building window sashes. So first thing, before we get into some of the curved work, I want to talk to you about your basic terminology and some of the tools that we've worked with when we're making windows. This is a project that we've been working on for the Saunders House, and this is your basic construction for 18th century windows. We have the top rail here, we have the stile here, and the muttons or mullions. I've heard those terms used interchangeably. But since most of the joinery that we're going to be doing on this, it will be mortise and tenon joints. So you can see with this piece that we have right here, this is the mortise or the mouth, and this is the tenon or the tongue. And so with this particular piece, you can see that there's a molding that's attached to the front. So instead of being mitered to make the two pieces fit together like you might see in a molding, what we're doing is coping them out. So this particular part right here is actually shaped out or shaved to be the complement for this side right here. And so putting these pieces together, we just go ahead and tap them in place, and these joints will be pegged together with a technique called draw boring, where we offset the holes between the tenon and the mortise just slightly so that when we drive that really dry peg in place, that it kind of locks in position. One of the reasons that we don't use hide glue for this, which was available to us, is that well, it's not going to hold up to the elements. We're going to put a coat of oil-based paint on it, but still, eventually, the hide glue would start to fail. It's fine for interior stuff, but not so much for anything that's going to be going outside. Now, according to some of the research, Mark Reese, who is a tool historian, kind of outlined some of the processes for these different types of tools that we would have. First off, before the 1750s, you're probably using a general toolkit of a joiner, molding plane or some kind of rebate plane. But as we get into the latter half of the 18th century, we'll start to see some of the specialization in these tools. Now, I've got two right here that would be used to cut the larger moldings like so. And so we've got a sash plane here. It's got a curved blade to it. Let's see. It's got the blade is shaped to conform to the sole of the plane, and usually with sash planes, the fences are a little bit longer because stability and accuracy is really, really important to this kind of work. And so this would be shooting along the edge of the board to create that form. Now, usually these two planes are labeled 1 and 2, and the thought is that one plane might be your workhorse, the one that you use for roughing out the material and getting most of the stock done. And then the other plane you leave razor sharp, so that could be your final finished pass. So for a 4-cut method, you would have a plane to do both sides. That's 4 cuts. And then you'd have a tool called a moving philoster plane, which is a tool with a blade on it, a fence that can be moved back and forth, and then you have a depth stop on that. There are some sash philoster planes that are actually, the fence is located on arms that can swing out or move out from the base. Give you a little bit deeper cut for that. Another technique that we would have would be more in the 18th century, the 1800s, where you have a plane that can cut the profile in one pass. So you're cutting both sides of that joint, and then you're still using that moving philoster to do the rebate for the glass. But we don't see that being used all that often here. And the last technique that we have would be these 2 planes right here. They're basically the same profile that we have here. The distinction being is that one plane has 2 blades in it, the other plane has just the one. So with this tool, it requires a little bit finer setting up to get this to function properly, because getting that blade to cut accurately into the shape that you want, it's a lot of work to just sharpen that up and getting that working right. The other plane that we have here is a 2-bladed plane, and we have one blade for the rebate and then the other blade for the profile there. And so the advantages of this tool is that you can go ahead and sharpen them individually. You can adjust them individually to do a little bit finer precision with this. So this plane is for that 2-cut method that we see here. All right. So when we were working on these projects, these are great tools to have, but the problem is that they only do straight runs. What do you want to do if you have something that you need to go into inside of the curve? And that's what I want to talk about with these projects. What kind of tools did they have access to? What kind of processes could they have used to do something with these curved muttons and sashes that we have here? So let's go ahead and take a look at a video about the Bruton Parish Church and a little bit of its history. Well, welcome to the Bruton Parish Church. This is the eastern end, and this is the window that I've been doing most of my research on. The church itself was built sometime between 1712 and 1715, and in the 1750s they expanded the building 25 feet to the east, so pushing closer to Palace Green. So in fact, this window that we have right here in this placement is newer than the windows on the north and the south. But the one that we're looking at right now is actually a reproduction of the one that was built in 1752. That's hanging in our museum. One of the things that I was looking for with the construction of these windows is how were the casements or the architraves put together? What kind of joints did they use? Now, realizing that there had been a lot of restoration work done on these windows, I had to take some of that evidence in with a grain of salt. But as you can see, with the east-facing window there, it really doesn't show a lot of pegs to hold that joint together. But when we take a look at the south window, or the one that's facing Duke of Gloucester Street, you can see 2 pegs on either side of the seams, which seem to indicate there was some kind of tenon being held in place. But our curators actually think that might be a later repair. Here's the restored 1752 window that's currently hanging in the DeWitt Wallace Museum. The joinery on the main part of the window, attaching the straight muttons to the curved muttons, we can see that on this outside frame, the circumference of the window is actually held together with a mortise and tenon joint. and is a peg together. On this particular picture that we show here, where the straight bar, the center cross is engaging the outside frame, you can see that it actually goes all the way through instead of stopping on the inside edge of that frame. In this picture, you can see where the frame is coming all the way through, and we also have a little peg only on one side holding that tenon in place. You can see here with the curved mullions and the straight mullions that they come together with mortise and tenon joints, but since this is an exterior window, we're not going to be able to use hide glue, which is soluble in water. So we are going to be pegging these joints together, but not all of these joints are pegged. When we see things that the straight mullions are coming into the curved mullions, you'll find a peg, but not the reverse where the curves are going into the straight runs. So one of the other things about window sashes that I wanted to tell you about was when you're getting into something as narrow as this, the challenge will be how do you hold it securely in place while you're working on it. And so usually you come up with something like a sticking board or of this sort here, where what I've done is I put a screw in the bottom of this piece right here so that it can have something to push against. And then I've got a little block on the backside that has a nail in it that helps to lock it in place. So imagine what you're doing is you're taking your plane and working that piece through and cutting off this piece like along so. So it keeps it securely in place and working that through. But what happens then is when you take and flip it over, you've now got something that's wobbling around too much. So you can either see tools where they hold on to the edge right here, keeping it securely in place. But what I ended up doing is making a little trough that this fits into like so. And that helps to hold the whole thing in place with these little pegs where the mortises are going to be. And that way you can kind of work the piece through and such and keep it from moving. Now, the other thing on with the video of the Bruton Parish Church that you saw, the thing that always comes to mind is who built them. And so we've, looking through some of the records just when they were commissioning the work for the church, we found a list of a couple of names that come to mind. James Skelton was listed there. Louis Delaunay, who is a carpenter. John Tullett and Henry Carey. And with Williamsburg being such a small town, I've seen their names pop up in a lot of these different building projects, but whether that means that they were the one that was in charge of that or whether they were just one of the workers working on a variety of different projects, I'm not exactly sure. Now, one of the aspects with the Bruton Parish Church is that there's been a lot of work done to it. As the video showed, there's been some expansion going on to it. We've got restorations. It's 1905. We have a restoration in 1938. Colonial Williamsburg comes in, inspects the property in 1939, and we've done some modifications in the 1940s or so from that. Most of the work that they found in the architectural reports is that there has been repair done to all of these windows. So sashes, casements have all been worked on and replaced. Now, one of the things that you might notice too from the video is that the north and south windows, the window that was facing Duke of Gloucester Street, are different in construction. They actually have moving sashes, like the one that I showed you earlier. It's the eastern window that is completely just that all that framework on it. But the original window from 1752 is hanging in the museum, and what's there now is actually from the 1930s or 40s. Now, before we get into showing you some of the layout work on the drawing, maybe this is a good time to say, if you've got any questions, please go ahead and start bringing them in, and we'll answer them as they come. All right, so for the layout of this piece, we were fortunate that when there was a restoration done on the church, that we have Perry, Shaw, and Hepburn, a architectural company out of Boston, to do these extensive drawings. And we've got drawings of the Wren Building, the chapel, the Capitol, and using that as kind of a guide as to some of the construction details on it. These windows, as you can see, they are huge. They are 7 feet in diameter, and brickwork along the outside of this piece here too. So that was one of the tricky things about it too, is that the sash itself is at the museum, but all of the casements, trying to figure out how that was attached and put into attached to the building and located. But to go through some of the processes, basically the first thing that I ended up doing is creating the cross right here. These are larger sections in profile compared to the muttons, which are still rather wide. And laying it out off of a center point right here, I made a 90-degree line, and then using trammel points based off of some that were found in the Matthews tool chest. You might have heard me talk about the Matthews tool chest with some of the tools that I've been reproducing. And setting it on the line there like so at the 7-foot diameter, and just marking that whole thing out. So the red on this drawing indicates the window sash. The black up here indicates the casement or the architrave. You might remember this piece that I was working on here, and so that fits right then about at that point. Once we had that established, there were a couple of other things that I was looking into with this, is that we have these muttons coming off at a 45-degree angle from that center point there, and then basically split that difference to locate where these straight ones. Once those were established, it was just basically drawing the arcs to make everything fit. And there again with pegs, trying to figure out what joints are pegged and what aren't. These crossbar pieces go all the way through the framework on the outside, so you saw in that picture that little, the end view of that, and how those pieces were put together. But the thing about this, it all boils down to, we have planes that can do these straight runs, like so. But now, once we have those established, how to do those curved surfaces. So once I had this set up here, I was able to take this tool, and on the outside, that was easy enough with a convex. But now trying to figure out what to do on the inside. And I'm still working on that curve, the tool that required for that.
And maybe this would be a good time for a couple of questions.
Sure.
Before we get on with things. Denise was asking, and Art seconded this. Wanted to know where the glass came from, for these windows, and also maybe add, would that impact the layout? Is there a limit in the size that you can get, and so forth?
It's really interesting to research a little bit of that, because Jamestown had a glass house, and we can see that was an industry that they were trying to establish over here in the colonies, and it never really took off. Just to give you a quick overview on that, is that when you're getting into those clear panes of glass that we oftentimes take for granted because you can go to any hardware store and find it, that was for the upper echelons. That was really a difficult product to make. We don't find anybody that's listed in town as a glazer, basically somebody that does professional glass cutting and installing the glass, but it usually tends to fall to either the carpenters or the joiners to do that kind of work here in Williamsburg. So we would be ordering that glass from England. It was a technique and skill that was very well protected, and they didn't want to have those secrets coming out, because generally speaking, you need to add sodium dioxide, I think it is, to the process to make glass crystal clear. But we do see some references where they're ordering windows for the Capitol, and they're looking for crystal glass, which I imagine is that really clear stuff that we're talking about.
One more question from Denise, and we'll get to some other questions later in the program, but about layout. Seems so cumbersome and large. Would you do this typically on the floor or on a big table? I mean, are you doing it at full scale like you've done here?
Well, that is a really interesting question, because I wasn't sure exactly how to start that project. What would be the best way? Number one, our shop is kind of small, and we really couldn't lay out a 7-foot diameter window in there, so I had to find an outside place to do this kind of work. But I was wondering too, is that would you just go ahead and lay out maybe a template, and just once you have those small sections set out, you just go ahead and use that as a pattern for all other 8 pieces for the outside architrave there. So where I'm finding that some of this makes sense is that you see a lot of this kind of work in this scale being laid out full scale, just for ease of work and just to see it. I always kind of like, if you can see it, you can believe it. And if I can see how the whole thing fits together, I think it'll come out a little bit better. So honestly, I don't know how they did it back in the day, but it seemed to make sense to me to do it full scale. So once we have these outside points laid out, some of the tools that I was working with, for those you saw, why don't we go ahead and show a video of some of these different tools and how some of these pieces were processed back at the joiner shop. Well, welcome to the joiner shop. I want to show you some of the tools that we had to use and modify to make some of these curved muttons for this circular window that we have here. Now, one of the aspects about doing curves is that if you've got the convex surface here, you can actually pretty much use your regular old molding plane going around those curves like so. And I want to show you how this is working right here. I've got basically this part right here, and I'm going to go ahead and take a little bit off of this surface with this moving Philister plane here. So just having it set up and going across the surface like so, I can go ahead and get the curves, just kind of finding that one point. But the thing is, you notice I'm starting out at the top, because I can't start down below and work my way up, or I'm going to get a lot of splintery mess. The problem is this plane can't work in that way. We can't change the fence over. So I still have one of these planes around that I can use to hold to work in the opposite direction. Now, to get some of those inside curved surfaces, I also have some of these other planes that I modified to make it work on some of those inside curves going in this direction. But remember, we're always cutting downhill with those pieces. These 2 planes that we have right here are kind of big brother and little brother. They both have the same idea to it. It's in the sense that it allows me to, along a line, to go ahead and plane along that curved surface. So what I'm doing is I'm using my fingers as a fence along that that inside edge to take and cut out those pieces there. And so I would just go ahead and work this down into to create that little fillet along this edge, and then I would go back in with one of my other planes that we modified and clean up that surface, or take a scraper and start to work that and clean that up. So the other option would be to take and find a plane that actually can cut this profile around the curve. But I ended up using a scraper to scrape off that surface and get that smooth. So it was a little bit of carving in a way to get this to the shape I was looking for. So I've got two planes here that are also related to each other. This is a plow plane, and you can see we've got a blade projecting out of it, and this is a great tool to use if you're doing straight runs. But what I needed to do was also a curved groove. So based off of some research in a couple of plane books, I ended up making a plane with a curved sole to it. This is based off of the John Sims plane. He was trained as a joiner and developed this, and I imagine for doing this particular operation right here, where curved fence, you can adjust it to a steeper or shallower curve, and then just use this to go across and work the grain. So this isn't real pretty right at this point, but what I'm going to do is go back in once I've cleaned out most of the material and clean it up with a router plane. So this is another choice that I had for doing some of these curved surfaces. It's not the most elegant tool, but it's a scratch stock. It's basically an old saw blade that I filed down to create the shape I was looking for. The thing about this process is basically what you're doing is you are cutting the wood if it's good and sharp and working right. The challenge, though, is that as you're working with it, it's pretty much just removing small bits of material. And I remember that there's roughly about 20 feet of this that has to be processed through. And one of the things about scrapers is that when it's going through less dense material, it gives you kind of a ropey effect, as you can see right along here. So what I usually do is get most of the material away, then sharpen the tool again, and then if I have to, I'll go back in with some scrapers or a file or something just to clean up that surface. But you can see that really getting this one segment, it doesn't take too long. I think when I was doing this earlier that it took me about 30 minutes to do both sides of this bead. So this is the piece that I was working on in that video, and there's still a little bit of work left to do on it. I've got the bead here that I need to clean up a little bit, and there's going to be an ogee molding, that S-shaped molding that goes along this edge right here. But I still have a little bit of work to do on this, and I'll use this modified rebate plane that I turned into kind of a compass shape where the sole is curved. And I'll be able to cut like this and then flip it around and cut at it from the other side. But as the problem always goes with this kind of work is that what kind of tool to use to do that kind of curved shape. And so I'm looking at taking one of these planes, making one that has a shorter sole to it and that has a slight curve, and will allow me to kind of cut that area out as opposed to relying on a scratch stock. The other thing is that with these casements or architraves that we have here, there are about 8 of them that need to be joined together. And as the video you saw, the outside, the north and south windows and the eastern window, there was some kind of connection going in between these points. And on the north and south windows, the one that was facing Duke of Gloucester Street, we could see 2 pegs on either side of the seam, which looks something like this wheel that I made for our lathe. And you can see the seam. I've got 2 pins on either side, here and there, and it's holding in place a tenon, which is a piece of wood about 2 inches, 2.5 inches thick, just bridging that joint. Think about it as our 18th century version of a biscuit joint, and then that's shaped off and held in place with those. But talking to our historians, they think that maybe this is kind of a construction that you'd see on a repair, and we do see documentation that those casements were repaired. For the most part, on the outside frame of our window sash, you only see the peg on one side, which would indicate that it had a tenon that was going into a slot, as opposed to this slip tenon that we have here on that piece. So just trying to get an understanding about some of the processes and tools that they were using on that work. So once we have this piece in place, this is the large crossbar. What I found with the assembly part of this, with doing these curves that we have here, doing all the layout work where you could take a cutting gauge or a marking gauge. It's a tool with a blade and a movable fence to cut a straight line, but how do you do it off of a curve? So what I ended up doing is just making a little stock like this that had nails projecting out of it at the distances I was looking for, 2 brass pins that acted as references, and so taking it along the surface, creating the marks that I needed to locate where that fillet will be. So basically what I'm doing is recreating this kind of appearance, but in just that smaller scale. All right. So one of the other aspects about this is making sure that all of these are labeled. We have the same coped molding here. There's a special gouge that you use that's smooth on the outside, and the bevel is on the inside, so you can lay it down on that surface and just plane it right across. And what I found that helped out with the layout of work of this is taking it to my framing square and just making sure that these two surfaces are perpendicular to each other. Putting this whole thing together, let's see here. I always think about this, it looks like a pitchfork to me. And then these pieces will fit together and pegged in place, just making sure that those close up good and tight. And so there we have it. And so when we're cutting out the mortises for the rest of this, I ended up doing those first while there was still a piece of wood underneath there, so we had some support as I was chopping those out. And then we'll build out from the outside and get the outside framework together.
Thanks so much, Brian. We've got a number of questions starting to come in here. Looking at all of those different planes that you were using, Mike was curious to know, do you make them yourselves, or who's making them? Where are you getting them from? And if you could speak to that for today, but also for the 18th century.
Sure. I think generally we follow the idea with the trades is that I would not be able to make a good a tool that I would want to use better than somebody that does it 6 days a week, sun up to sundown. So go to a professional plane maker. The challenge being over here in the colonies is that hopefully one of the merchants here on our main street would have the tools that you needed on hand, but just like this little guy right here, this is kind of a specialized item. So maybe what you end up doing is taking one of your other planes that you have, like a plane like this, and modify it to that boat shape. And since this is copied off of one at the Matthews tool chest, and hopefully we can have that on display for you sometime soon, is that it only had Matthews' name on the front. There was no other maker's mark on the surface, which you typically would see. Two names, the guy that owned the tool and the guy that made it. But in that case, with only the one, maybe he did take something like this with a straight blade, not a skewed one, and just modify it to make it work. But in some of the books that we have of the period, they do show some of these tools being manufactured. This tool, the larger one that I showed you here too, was actually based off of one that you could purchase. So I think it boils down to 3 categories. If you have a project like this on hand, you either make do with the tools that you have, modify the tools that you have, or just bite the bullet and buy that tool. Hopefully they have it on the main street. If not, you're going to have to wait for it, and hopefully you're going to be able to use it more than once.
So you referred to the Matthews chests a number of times, and we can put a link with some images up in a little while, but could you tell us, just tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, we have 2 toolboxes in our collection that really have been our go-to for studying tools and information of the period and the technology. The Matthews, and we have the Cartwright tool chest. The Matthews tool chest, there are about 260-odd tools that survive in it. It's in an amazing condition. We're not sure exactly what trade Matthews had. We think that he was either a joiner doing window sashes, because we see a lot of sash planes and molding planes to that trade, or he could have been a coachmaker, because some of the planes that we have, things of this particular size just seem to me to be a little bit more of a coachmaker style plane. But hopefully we'll have that tool chest on display at our DeWitt Wallace Museum in upcoming years, and we can show you what we've been talking about. It's an amazing box. It's beautiful, and the tools are really wonderful.
So Susie was curious about how long it might take to make a window like this.
Well, hopefully. I think with something of this size, I haven't really figured it out yet. We usually say that a window that has about 4 lights to it, 4 panes of glass, usually will take us about 10 hours. The one that we have here, the Saunders House window, that would probably be about a day and a half worth of work. But honestly, I'm still working on this tally for this one.
Cheryl was asking if you think you'd have to make different planes, each time around you're doing different windows, or is it for a typical rectangular sash, is it usually the same planes that you already have?
We usually will find that the tools seem to be basic profiles. On one hand, it's fashion, and you're trying to keep up or exceed the Joneses, so to speak. So you would want to have something that's unique, but not so unique that you're not going to impress your neighbors. The other thing is that from a workman's standpoint, it goes back to the whole idea of use what you have on hand. And so I will try to buy the planes that have the shapes that my customers like, and so that's why you're going to see it over and over again in some of these styles of work. So good set of OG planes, good set of ovalos will go you a good long way. But I think with something like this, it also ended up with what I was thinking with this arcs that we have here. If I bought a plane that, or made a plane that had that curved sole to it, because remember, during this period, we're cutting this surface, not this surface. That kind of scraper plane that you have comes a little bit later than our time frame, and it's like a tool-handled draw knife kind of thing with the shaped blade to do the surfaces. That's that 3 plane cut that I was talking about. But to do this surface right here, does that mean that when you get out to this one or this one or this one, that you're going to need to have a different set of planes for each one? I don't think so. I think that if you have a plane that's purchased that can do the smallest diameter cut, you could then use it. It's going to be a little wobbly because the curve of the sole of the plane would be a little bit tighter, but you could still get it to function properly along these surfaces. Just make sure you've got good layout lines.
Susie was wondering about the wood. We saw in the videos you're working through some very hard southern yellow pine. Makes it tough for you, but must be pretty durable. Were there other typical choices that vary from region to region?
It does vary from region to region, but the great thing about yellow pine for us is that if you got a good straight tree, they usually will grow a considerable size. We usually look for something about 18 to 24 inches in diameter, and that really good tight growth ring stuff is what we're looking for. So if it's a frame, it's generally going to be southern yellow pine. Oftentimes we might use poplar if we're doing like a storage box or some more utilitarian container. Yeah, it has a lot of the characteristics. It's not as attractive as some of the other more showy woods, like walnut or mahogany or cherry, but we're going to paint it anyway, so it doesn't really matter as much.
So you've got an entire circular window made. How do you attach it to the building itself? And Susie's wanting to know that. And then we also have a question from Def Leppard, who wants to know how you then insulate around, or weather seal rather, around the window.
Well, there is an interesting picture that we took. When we went up to the attic of the Bruton Parish Church, we were able to see some of the insides of the smaller windows that are above the north and south large window. Unfortunately, with the eastern window that we have here, it was blocked by the pipes and the mechanism for our pipe organ. But we're looking at one of the smaller windows. You can actually see light through it. So this was set into the brickwork, and mortar was placed around it. So there wasn't really a lot of insulation going on between these two pieces. But oftentimes what will happen with this is that they can sandwich the architrave around some brick, and that helps to hold the window in place. But that was one of the difficult things with this project, was that getting access to that structure to see how they were dealing with that and joining it to the brickwork.
Would you typically, would the joiners be the ones that are installing these as well as making them?
I think so. There's some references where Thomas Jefferson, for example, orders some circular windows from Philadelphia from a Daniel Trump. Maybe he didn't trust the experience of some of the Williamsburg workmen. But looking at the window here and such, we have a lot of these windows around, so I'm thinking that there must be somebody in town that knew how to do it, and it would usually fall to us joiners. And there again, we do have references that carpenters were building some windows too.
Would the window work most likely be done at the building site or back in a shop?
The assembly of the window would be done back in the shop. It's one of the things that I think is different between carpenters and joiners. Carpenters, oftentimes, if you come to town, you can see this, where they're working in a large open field because they are laying out a lot of the stuff full scale, assembling it, and then taking it apart and then installing it to the job site. So we, as joiners, need to have a good sturdy workbench to plane the boards, do the assembly work, and then we would also go to the job site to install these pieces. But make them in the shop, and then we would go and install them.
Thanks, Brian. I think we have time for one final question today. You've got this big window underway. Could you tell us, I mean, we're in the spring, things are coming back to life. What does the year look like for the joiner's shop? Any big projects on the horizon?
Yeah, we've got some really great stuff that's coming on. If you've been reading some of our newsletters, we've been talking a lot about the Brace School, and we've been asked by the administration to make 2 fireplace surrounds, I think about 6 doors, and 9 to 10 window sashes for the building. Once it's moved to its new location, we'll then go ahead and get started to work on that. And that should take us a good long time. Scott Crow and Peter Hudson are going to take lead on those different aspects of that project as their final apprentice project.
Thank you so much, Brian, and thank you to everybody for watching along and sending in great questions. This project was funded in part by a generous grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities, and as always, was made possible through the generosity of our donors. Thank you. To learn how you can contribute to presentations like this, please follow the links pinned to the comments or find us at colonialwilliamsburg.org. Brian, do you have any final thoughts to send us on our way?
Yeah, I just want to thank you all for tuning into this. This has been a really fun project to work on, to try to discover, problem solve, just trying to figure out how they did this kind of work using the 18th century tools and techniques of that period. And so hopefully at some point we'll get this finished and get it together, and it might be on display over at the museum, or we might have it at the shop. So either way, come on by and take a look. And thank you again for tuning in. I appreciate it.